Welcome back. I'm playing Warhammer Mordheim City of the Damned, and I figured I'd go through here and kind of give my tips for beating the Skaven here. Now that I've successfully completed their campaign. There's no definitive end to this game. It's just keep going out, getting wordstone, level things up, and once you beat those story missions, now there's usually a little thing that comes up that says, congratulations, you beat the Skaven campaign, but as I've already beaten the campaign, it didn't happen here. So if you still wanted to use your warband, you could sit there and still do little missions here. If you were trying to, get the veteran system going and collecting resources here. In terms of respecking, you do get respec points, so if you wanted to redo that, you could end up clicking this and respec the veteran system. I wasn't sure how that worked, because there's not a respec system for the units here. So I'll just give my 2 cents for what I'd recommend for leveling these guys, because there are several different builds. Now I know this is very controversial, but I tend to like to keep my guys alive and focus on durability to not have to waste a bunch of times. Other people like to use the more special aggressive abilities, but I think kitting these guys out for survival is the best way to go. So for the Assassin Adept here, I kind of tried 2 different builds. One was the agility build, so he has significant melee resistance, so 63%, so it reduces the chance of him actually getting hit. And then he has the dodge ability at 115% right now, so if they fail to, or if they do connect on me over the melee resistance, and I have a chance using the dodge ability, and then the dodge ability has a 115% chance to allow him to dodge the attack. So that's fantastic. I ended up then keeping his toughness and strength low. This was unfortunate because it definitely made it so he was doing very little damage by the end of the game, especially against heavily armored units, so I didn't really like that. But by having him be a dodge guy, he rarely was hit, so I didn't really need the bonus HP which the toughness was giving me in addition to the other resistances. So this was a viable build, but it just made it so he could run in and then just pretty much aggro guys and they would attack him like nobody's business, and they would miss the attacks, but he just couldn't do a lot of damage. I strongly recommend that you maximize the leadership as long as it's not injured, because 1, it increases their chance to pass psychological tests, so that's the all alone fear terror, because if those end up happening, then you can lose either strategic or offensive points and be less likely to hit. And if you do it failing all alone, then your guy will run around and run away, I should say, and then they'll get attacks of opportunity to any enemy units that are surrounding him, or he'll just not have any points for that turn. You'll have to end the turn, and then you can't even use stances sometimes, and therefore he'll likely get himself killed. I also really liked having these guys having intelligence, not so much because I used it for any of the abilities, because you usually use this for the magic resistance, the spell damage, but instead I liked it for the stun resistance, and then for the Rat Ogre, it helped with allowing him to overcome his stupidity. The alertness I really did not feel was very beneficial, but perhaps if you were going to turn this into a tanky guy, you would put the alertness up, and then you could increase his melee resistance even further, because you wouldn't have all these points in the agility to increase it here. And then since I had him as a melee user, obviously I increased his melee skilled up to 16, but by doing that it defaults his parry to 99%. So therefore, well, I have some other abilities that raise it up too, but because if you're going to take him as a melee user, his parry is going to be so high, it kind of, you can make a strong argument that you shouldn't be wasting all these points in agility, because if you increase your strength, it's going to increase your damage by, like, it would be 9 times 3, so what, 27%, and then it would also allow him to have 2 extra carrying capacity, which would have been a significant boon. And then I would have had more points into toughness here, so if he did get hit, he would have more survivability. So I'm not a total fan of this agility. I don't really like this build a whole lot, but it's definitely one if you're doing an agility build. In a dodge build, this would be the way to go. And then you get the accuracy up, because that increases the chance for him to crit, which did happen fairly significantly, and that also increased his crit chance, and then allows you to help bypass some dodge. So in terms of the abilities, if you're going to have them as a dodger, I think mastering sidestep is great, because that allows you to have 3 potential dodges every turn. And then I really like having the Warcry ability on your leader, because if you master this, then for one turn, everybody within 5 meters will have a 20% increase in their melee damage, and if you have units like the Rat Ogre and other units that are real close to him, you know, getting 5 attacks at 20% increased damage, that's like having a whole extra attacks available to you. The default ability that he has is the Defense Breach, so about attacks bypass 10% of the dodge and parry, so this allows him to have increased chances to hit. I did like having these guys have the Swarm ability because it increased the chance to hit by 10% if there was another Skaven attacking a unit, so especially against the bosses it significantly increased their chance to hit. And if you were going to do a crit build, this would effectively automatically increase your melee crit chance by 10%, so that would help. I did spend points into knowledge tactics. In retrospect, I would have really liked to have these points somewhere else to increase his damage, so I would not recommend doing this. The one advantage, perhaps, to doing it this way is it allowed me to put this guy into light armor, which then allowed him to have 20% armor resist, or absorption, I should say, and I would still have greater than 15% parry, but I could have much easier just ended up putting this guy in with a shield specialist, and then you'd have just a 10% melee resistance and a 10% parry chance. So then this would be, what, 5% lower? Actually, no, not even. No, actually it would. It would be... No, I take that back, sorry. Because I already have the shield involved because it has the parry, which has a 20% chance, so that would not have changed. So it would have just given me 10 additional, so yes, my parry would be 94% instead of 99, which is still pretty damn good. And then I have an additional 10 melee resistance if I had done that. And then I really like these guys having the quick incision, so I recommend putting this on all of your units because it stacks, and pretty much every time you hit, if you have a mastery, it'll reduce their melee resistance by 6%, which again isn't a damage reduction, but it reduces the chance of getting hit by. So if you keep stacking up a bunch of quick incisions, it'll really increase your unit's chance of damaging the target. And then because I really like giving these guys a short sword and shield, in retrospect I could have either done some flash parry as well, or even giving them swift counter, which gives you a 40% chance to recover an offensive point when you're blocking and then getting a counterattack, and then if you master it, it goes up to 80%, so there would have been a lot of times where I could have had some counterattacks to allow me to hit back, and then if I would have had the strength up, then he could actually been a little bit of a better damage dealer. So that could have been a better option. The one thing I would say in retrospect as well is if you are doing a dodge build, by the time you get to a level 10 you get 9 offensive points, so then you could end up finally getting 3 attacks with some two-handed weapons. So if you wanted to give them fighting claws or the halberd or the weeping blades to end up stacking some poison, because as you can see it does 24 to 36 poison damage, and then that stacks, so that's significant amounts of damage that you can end up putting on with the high tier weeping blades had you turned them into a dodger, and I would have realized that I had those 9 points here. So you just have to decide how you were gonna build this guy out. I think seeing what I see now, I wish I would have kind of given him a two-handed weapon instead of what I had here, because I think his damage output would have been significantly higher there, because you can see it does 59 to 68 damage, whereas before on the final mission, if you watch that, he was doing like 15 damage to the Manticore. Oh, and actually, I take that back. The armor absorption on the light armor is 30% at the highest tier, so that's the one advantage to increasing the dodge above the 100%. Because otherwise, if you're using the clothing, you get another 20% as well. But once you get above 100%, I don't know if it really makes a big difference. I mean, they may bypass your some of your dodge if they're using things like a spear, because it allows them to bypass 35%, so I guess there is some benefit to getting above 100%, so when you start getting some of these penalties applied, you still have significant dodge choices. But that's kind of my 2 cents here, so just decide if you want to use a sword and shield, because I found that to be by far more effective through most of the campaign, but by the time you get to the last level, if you do have him set up as a two-handed weapon guy, he'll do significant amounts of damage for you, but it takes you a long time to get there. And early on, as you're leveling him, there's a ton of chances of missing attacks in this game. And so by giving him a one-handed weapon, the attack penalty or attack is the attack cost, I'm trying to say, is only 2 offensive points. So then for most of the campaign you can do 3 to 4 attacks compared to 2 if you're using a two-handed weapon. Because the big thing with all these two-handed weapons is they cause tiring. So every additional attack costs an additional AP or OP in this game. So you know, first attack is 2, then 3, then 4, and so that's why you need to have the 9 offense points there to be able to get the 3 attacks going. So those are my 2 cents on the assassin leader here, and you know, certainly you could turn him into a crit guy if you did a different build too and focused on that and had some crit weapons, but overall I really like him as a one-handed weapon with the sword and shield and increasing the survivability. But this was a very reasonable build if you were going to use a two-handed weapon. But again, I think you could even argue that if you're going to do a two-handed weapon, you want to even have more strength, because the whole point of the two-handed weapons is really increasing their damage output. So next unit is the Poison Wind Globadier, and then I actually don't think I ever read his, I can't remember if I ever read his background, but clan rats trained to use the devious weapons of Clan Scryer. Globadiers are sold as warriors to war bands by the warlock engineers. The warpstone gas and the globes can kill or cripple enemies or prevent wizards from casting spells. Other alchemical gases can strengthen or even heal those exposed to them. These sneaky ratmen even fabricate bombs disguised as wordstone to maim the unwary. And so this guy was kind of the backbone of our game. He allowed us to easily beat the campaign missions and definitely not suffer very many losses, because usually when you're playing this game you're suffering a lot more losses than I did. I think I only got rid of, what did I get rid of, 2 characters? I can't remember, and that's because they stacked up too many injuries. But this guy, he starts out very, very weak when you're first kitting him out, but by the end of the game he's your main healer, and he's incredibly good at it. So I like to get these guys kitted out as dodgers and then set them as ballistic skills up, because they actually do significant, they do really well as a ranged damage dealer, and then by staying at distance you can keep using their infused globes, which is their healing ability. And so I like to max this ballistic skill out so it increases their chance to hit and their damage, and then you can start focusing on getting, you know, the crit chance higher as well. So I recommend that you put pretty much all your points into agility, and then once that's maxed out, putting some points into toughness so they can increase their survivability, because the one downside about the Poison Globadier is they're immune to the globe's effects, and that includes the healing too. So you have no way of healing this guy outside of items, or if you had some other unit like a sorcerer that has some healing abilities, but they cannot heal themselves. They can heal everybody else though. So by getting the agility, they have the dodge ability, and that allows them to stay alive, and then the toughness in case they end up getting hit. I like giving them the leadership, focusing on that, because enemy units like to charge in and get this guy into combat, because they recognize that he's very soft and squishy, and so if he gets a couple guys surrounding him, you can increase the chance of him fearing from his all alone, or failing his all alone check, so that way he doesn't get a bunch of bonus stacks. It'll be easy for him to kill him. And then later on I focus on getting the intelligence up so he has some stun resistance in case they do close the distance on him here. In terms of the skills, I could not make up my mind what I wanted to do with this guy. He starts out with the Poison Globes mastered, and so what that does is units starting within the 15 meter radius, or sorry, you can throw it up to 15 meters, but it's 3 meters once you break the globe. It leaves a 2-turn poison cloud, and anybody inside it takes 20 to 25 damage. And then if they enter the cloud, they take 15 to 20 damage, and it deals an additional 15 to 20 damage per turn for 2 turns, unless they get the poison resistance save. So that's kind of its default ability here. The infused globe is the ability that allows you to heal. It first starts out being 15 HP, but then it increases to 30 HP, and you can stack this for the healing. Now the benefit, or the debuffs I should say, are not stackable, so it's not like you're going to get the minus offensive point, minus movement, minus 15 aesthetics times 2. It's just going to do one of those things on there. But that allows you to heal up to 60 points, HP points per turn, and for henchmen and stuff, that's pretty much their whole attack, so you can just sit back and keep your guys alive while you're fighting them, and it's just a very, very powerful ability. Now I did give these guys the poison ability as well, and so that effectively means that you can, for the cost of 3 strategic points, you put this poison on, and if you hit somebody with your ranged attack, it then causes them to lose 2 offensive points. If you master it, it'll increase it up to 4. The issue I had is I was rarely using this, so plus or minus on whether I'd recommend it. I mean, there were times that it was nice. The big thing is a lot of my other units also had the warp poison, and you can't stack multiple warp poisons debuffs on a unit and just make them lose all the offense points. So I think in retrospect I probably would like to have those points somewhere else to get them some more passive skills, or you know, just do some other things, because I just didn't feel like I used it very often. And I did like having the sidestep. The reason for that is, well, if he's at range, you're rarely going to have the strategic points, I think they're called. Yeah, strategy points to be able to use this ability, but if he's caught in melee and you're going to switch weapons and you can't escape, then you're going to want the sidestep to give you 2 dodge attempts. In terms of the ranged abilities, I think mastering quick reload is always essential if you're going to have a really good ranged unit, because you can save up a bunch of strategy points by doing that, and that'll allow you to do 2 to 3 aim shots every turn, and that'll significantly increase the chance of them hitting, and then you'll even have some leftover strategy points to be able to put your guys into dodge. I do like getting Bullseye mastered, because that increases the chance to hit by aim by an additional 10%, and it reduces the cost of using the ability by 1 strategy point, so that allows you to even save even more strategy points. The trick shooter, I guess it is also a really good ability, because most units will have range resistance, especially if they have shields, so this allows you to overcome that and increase the chance of the hit. And then Eagle Eyes allows you to get past some armor absorption and allows you to get additional damage dealt with your ranged weapons, so ideally it would have been nice to be able to max that out. I don't find that the ranged guys crit quite enough that it makes a lot of sense to get sharpshooter, but say if you bypass some of these skills and head everything into accuracy, you could make an argument of doing that, because it'll increase your crit chance by 4%. And then I find that the overhead ability is kind of a luxury ability, and what it does is allows you to have increased chance of hit if you're at a higher elevation, but it's very situational, because sometimes you just don't have a map that allows you to get to overhead position to be able to shoot down into guys. But if you have that option, it definitely makes things even better, because then sometimes you don't even have to use the aim shot, and that'll allow you to regularly use the warp poison instead. But that's how I ended up getting this guy out. He does have several different globes and things like that you could have done. So if you're having a spellcaster that's just driving you crazy, if you would have had the strangling globe, then that would stop them from casting abilities. If you're doing online matches or something, maybe the Wordstone Lure would be good, but I didn't think if the AI would actually pick that up. If you wanted to affect the strategy points, then you could use the Numbing Poison instead. You could also do this to buff your guys, which I did think about doing as well, but ultimately, because I didn't know which one of these buffs would be on there, I didn't want to do it, and I figured I'm going to be healing instead, so I didn't end up getting that ability. And then this is like a debuff globe if you wanted to do it. Now, there's also an option that you could use to make him into a melee fighter, because he has this vent ability, which reduces everybody's chance to hit by 10%. Now you gotta be careful it's not your guys aren't around there, because it would end up debuffing your own guys. You can also end up using some warp fumes, and with his passive abilities here, you don't really care about the Warpstone resistance, because you're probably not going to be using this guy to gather those things. But you could get him Dagger Specialist if you wanted to allow him to be a melee guy, because he'd be doing a lot more damage and be able to crit a lot better with the dagger. So if you're going to do that, you would want to get this ability. You probably want to give him Swarm as well, so he has an additional 10%, because you're going to have a 20% crit chance just with those things here. I rarely found that the poison resistance and things was nice. I mean, if you're going to be spamming poison globes, maybe, but as the things don't stack, I just didn't find it did enough damage there. Yeah, and that was so. Like I said, I really recommend that you just keep them as a ranged unit, but you do have options with putting them into like a dodge dagger build to do a lot of crit damage if you wanted to. But he's so essential to keep alive because you want to keep him going to heal everybody. I just really think it makes more sense to keep him ranged. Perhaps if you're fighting real life players that know to swarm him, it would make sense for him to be melee, but in this game where you're facing the AI, keep him ranged. Next unit is the Eshin Sorcerer. This was a unit I really did not use very well on my playthrough. I definitely recommend getting the agility maxed out. That way he can dodge, because units will again try to charge into him to do a lot of attacks. Focus on getting his intelligence up, because that increases his spell damage by 3%. Because I think when I was looking at the spells, I didn't really appreciate that he could actually do significant amounts of damage, because I think when you're doing the abilities and looking at that, it's just the base numbers, and it doesn't take into consideration that you're going to have, 18 times 3 for additional magic damage here. And as you get his abilities going, you can really lower this guy's chance of summoning Tzeentch's Curse, especially if you start putting equipment on him. And then I like giving him the leadership, so that way he has the morale chance increased. I didn't find that really putting anything into alertness was beneficial. Perhaps increasing the initiative sooner, so when he uses some of his spells, he could buff the other guys. But again, I felt these things would be much better. I like to keep these guys as ranged units as well, because they just can suffer so much damage in melee, and other units like to focus them down. Plus, I think if they cast spells in melee, it decreases their chance of successfully completing the ability. So by maxing out the ballistic skill for his chance to hit, and then the accuracy, I thought that worked out very well. The big thing to know about these guys is early on when you get your rat ogres, the impressives are incredibly powerful units, but the rat ogre starts out being stupid, and he starts out being not only stupid with that ability where he has to do a intelligence check every turn to see if you'll actually get a turn, but he starts out with very low intelligence, so it's even lower. So if you end up using the guidance here, it allows you to guarantee that you won't have to do an intelligence check for 1 turn, and it increases the 3-turn duration if you mastered it. So that's something to take into consideration. I strongly considered getting this mastered on this guy, but then I ended up finding some headgear that allowed him to increase the chance of him passing the stupidity check. And then he was getting it reliably enough that I didn't need to waste the skill points here. I do recommend getting him sidestep if you're going to do him as a dodger, which I don't see how you would do it any other way. And that will allow him to be able to get the dodge stance ×2 if he gets attacked. Now, the one thing I didn't consider is for his passive skills. If you run and pick up Wordstone, that will also increase his damage by an additional 15%. So now you're talking about getting upwards of 50% damage between the intelligence boost and this, and the fact that the Warpstone Lightning is an AoE attack. So this guy could actually potentially do a shit ton of damage if you had him kitted out appropriately. So I really did not think about those numbers very well until the very end of the game, when I was offline and just kind of looking to see what I would want to do for skill points on this guy. So I definitely, in retrospect, would have built him out a little bit better. I strongly recommend getting channeling. The reason is Tzeentch Curse. I mean, if in the worst case scenario, it'll do 9,999 damage, which will effectively kill your unit. Otherwise, you can get stunned, be silenced, do all these negative things. So by dropping it down by 15%, it significantly reduces. In fact, I think when I was casting spells, I had a negative Tzeentch Curse time, so I could do it 2 spells per turn and have less than 10% Tzeentch Curse. And if I would have switched it over to the staff, I would have had it even lower. But as I had him as a ranged unit, I had him quick reload, bullseye, but unfortunately not mastered because I ran out of points. And then I gave him trick shooter because I just had points left and he never got to the max level. But had I had the max level, I would have done this a little bit differently. And then I forgot with the spells, because I'm like, oh shit, do I not get to do spells? But you have to come over to the spell slot to be able to get spells. And then the one thing I don't like about this game is when you're got spell points to use, you get this signal here, but it does not give you that signal for the spell points, so you just have to manually check to see what levels you get it. So his default wither ability is not bad. It pretty much decreases strength, agility, and toughness by 3, and then reduces the movement of the enemy units so they can't escape from you and they're just kind of weakened. I don't think it makes sense to waste points getting it mastered, but there are several really good spells that you could do here. I used the Musk of Courage on this guy. I like this ability, and had I realized it was there, I would have definitely leveled it earlier in the campaign, because especially when fighting the impressive units, I was suffering all sort of fear and terror tests, and then I was also doing that when I was fighting the undead, and this would allow me to completely nullify that, because early on he's attacking with range. He'll do 1 or 2 attacks and he would regularly have 2 AP left, and then I could have just used this Musk of Courage and stacked that up because it lasts 2 turns, so that would allow me to significantly increase his damage output. The other ability that's actually really good is this Gaze of the Horned Rat, and I definitely would have used this had I had it leveled up, because what it is it's an AoE debuff for enemy units. It doesn't affect your units, and it reduces the offensive points, so that would allow you to effectively cancel out some attacks from the enemy units. And when you're getting into these massive melees where 5-6 units are all meeting in the middle, you just cast that ability on there and you can get 2 to 3 offense points taken off. And then in terms of his other abilities, they're all pretty good actually. I wouldn't really do the Blessing of Filth because it's only a single unit, but effectively that just adds a poison to them, and it does 18 to 25. Yeah, it's stackable. Maybe with the Weeping Blades it would be very powerful, but I think for the limited amount of points I would not recommend that. The Enshrouding Mist, if you're having trouble with your guys getting into getting in these melees and getting shot apart, this would probably be a good way to do it, because what it does is all Skaven units are immune to these penalties, but you cast it, it's an AoE around the caster, it has a 15 range, and then it effectively gives all the enemy units around them a 15% melee debuff, but in exchange everybody's range resistance goes up by 25%. And if you end up mastering it, then it increases the range resistance to 50% and the melee resistance to 30%. And so that could be a significant chance, because again, melee resistance is not a damage reduction, it's a chance to hit. And so you would significantly increase your chances of hitting enemy units, and then by your guys being immune to it, this would significantly buff your guys' ability to fight. So that could be a very powerful ability. I did not think this would be very good. Again, it's just kind of a poison ability. It debuffs things, reduces resistance to poison, so if you're doing an aggressive poison build perhaps, but I think that's going to be too situational, so I would not recommend that. Sorcerer's Curse is also a very good ability. It allows you to reduce enemy armor absorption, so when you're fighting other impressives or bosses, this could be very good. It also reduces the dodge and parry chance, and it also, when you master it, goes up to the armor absorption penalty goes to 40%, and then the dodge and parry go up to 30% penalties, so this would effectively allow you to nullify that. And then the Warp Lightning is his damage dealing ability that I didn't appreciate till the very end, because when I was looking at these numbers I'm like, oh, 10 to 15 damage, that's not very good. But then it allows you to bypass armor absorption, and it also stacks a random debuff on the target, and the damage goes up to 20 to 30 with 20 meter distance with the column, so not only is it the length, but the width I think gets a little bit bigger too. And then you still have the random debuff and bypassing armor, so with that plus a 50% damage from your intelligence, and if you picked up Warpstone buffs here, that's significant amounts of damage if you're casting in 2 of these every turn, so you could potentially do 50 to 100 damage, I suppose. So definitely did not appreciate how powerful that would be. And then if you are going to spam all these abilities, you'd probably want to give him a staff instead, so Zinch's Curse is down by another 12%, and then you'd want to give him a mark on there to lower Zinch's Curse even more. So perhaps if you're going to just be a spammer of spells, especially damage spells, you'd probably want to maybe make them into melee, but again, you'd want to have your agility going there. to increase the chances. And then generally you wouldn't want to have a helmet on because it does decrease the chance of casting spells, but again, I wanted to do everything I could to lower the Zinch's Curse ability, because when I've played with sorcerers in the past, they've always one-shotted themselves on when I really needed them, especially on campaign missions, so I was very scared of that. Now, my Rat Ogre, the big thing about these guys is, again, they start out stupid, so that's like the biggest debuff of any impressive unit, so they're really frustrating and really hard to use when you're first using them until you get a sorcerer to be able to put the guidance on them. And then the other thing to know is when you're doing the campaign missions, Fitch, I can't remember what his name is. He has the guidance ability mastered, so that his guidance will last for 3 turns. So just be aware that you don't have to take a sorcerer on the story missions, and you can take the Rat Ogres out without being a liability if you just have Filch go first and do that. And again, I don't remember if I actually read his abilities. So monstrous beast bred by Clan Mulder. Rat Ogres are valued for their immense strength and hardiness, if not their wits. It is not uncommon for a Rat Ogre to forget which side he is fighting, or even that he is still in the fight. Still, the terrifying might of a Rat Ogre is too enticing for even Clan Eshin to resist, and many of these brutes have been bought by the warbands in Mordheim. So that's the big thing with them. And then the things that are also important with these impressives, and I think it's all the way across, is they get a bunch of resistances by default, and they will always fight to the death, so you never have to worry about them getting scared or having the immune to all alone, so that's very good with these guys. They are restricted though to pay attention to what they're restricted to. So their armor is restricted, so they can only use light armor, so therefore I think you should always maximize their agility to allow you to master sidestep to give them 3 resistance. And then I went with toughness because I was just finding that that was significantly increasing the HP here, and that always gave me the ability to heal and throw them into whatever dangerous situation I could. Now, if you're going to focus more on doing tons of damage, then again, you'd want to have the strength up, but I thought survivability and tankiness for these guys was just a more critical thing for me. Now, I've focused on maximizing their intelligence, so that way it would increase the chances of passing the stupidity checks by themselves, so I didn't have to waste abilities every turn. Now, he has the great ability to get a bunch of leadership, which seems ironic since these guys are supposed to be practically retarded with how stupid they're supposed to be lore-wise, but then they're some of the best leaders that the Skaven have access to. But if you're going to give them active skills to buff leadership with the war cry and hold your ground and stuff, you could potentially do that with these guys as well. Instead, I ended up going with alertness because one defect, I should say, with the Rat Ogres is they're really easy to shoot from range, so by getting the alertness up, it gives them a bunch of range resistance. So I think his range resistance, yeah, is still even maxed out at 20 alertness, is only about 30%. But anything is better. But I just didn't find that the leadership made a lot of sense because we don't have to worry about the psychologic tests, and so all putting all those points into leadership would do is increase the morale unless I wanted to use the abilities, and I had other things that I wanted to level on this guy. I did focus on the weapon skill because I wanted to increase the chances of him hitting Mac. Was the most important thing for me, but that's because I didn't have bracers that were higher tier because I just didn't fight many Skaven, and so the easiest way to get equipment is to kill units once you get to the harder warband strength, and so they can get blue and purple. But I didn't get him. I think I used the default bracers pretty much to like the last 10 missions in the game, so that was really frustrating because his damage just freaking sucked. So it was more important for me to be able to hit, but I think you can make a strong argument that you'd want to max out his accuracy because you could get significant crit chances with these Rat Ogres, especially if you had the right bracers equipped. But in terms of the skills, he has fear, so pretty much if anybody gets into a chance to fight him and fails the fear test, then it reduces their chance to hit by 30%, which is definitely significant, and that's part of the reason that I really like that Musk of Courage, is that can also happen to you if you're fighting these guys. Again, the quick incision, because these guys get 9 offense points, so that's a lot of attacks every turn, so that allows you to do significant debuffs and really increase the chance of hitting. I did like giving them anticipation, but I think you could also argue that maybe these
points were better used elsewhere, especially if you were doing like a crit build. I would not get the anticipation, but what I was finding is these guys were just running into battle and tanking for me because I just couldn't do the damage since I didn't have good equipment for him. So it was just important for me to, every time he was getting hit, to increase his melee resistance by 6%. So that just allowed him to stay in the game because his damage was a third of what the AI forces were because he just didn't have equipment. I definitely like the awareness here. It just is a straight 10% melee resistance buff. So I definitely like that, but again, if you're doing a crit build, you probably want to get rid of that as well. And I think no matter what, you'd want to get the Swarm. That way you can increase his chance of hit by 10% and give him just a 10% crit chance. I definitely recommend mastering Sidestep, so he has up to 3 dodges per turn, because as you can see, he's got a 95% dodge chance. I did think Black Hunger, especially if you have the Poison Globadiers, is a good ability, because that just straight increases his melee damage by 40% and his armor, his attacks bypass 40% of dodge and parry, and it's easy for you to heal 30 wounds using the Globadier, so just using that is very powerful. And then I also really liked Insult, so I don't think I typically use that on my other playthroughs, but I definitely liked it here because it would just allow me to reduce melee resistance by 10%, and if you mastered it, it would go up to 20, but I didn't have the points to master it. But that's kind of how I built these guys out and kind of my logic there. Again, I ended up really lucking out finding this Amulet of Lucidity, so again, it increased his chance of passing stupidity chances by 35%, and then he has to use the clothing, so he can't increase his armor more, so just be aware of that, so you're not like, oh, I'm going to max out my strength so I can give him all these heavy armors and stuff. That's not a thing. You have to use the clothing, so therefore I think using the dodge is better. And then again, the bracers were just terrible because I just didn't have good bracers for most of the game, so his damage was really, really low. And I don't remember if I read the Sorcerer's background too. So versed in the dark arts, the magic of Eshin Sorcerer may seem paltry beside the might of the Grey Seer, but their arcane power is still considerable. Their magic is focused upon the strategies of deception, concealment, and swift death favored by Clan Eshin. An Eshin Sorcerer is a valuable asset to any warband, but a wise assassin will keep a wary eye on. So in terms of the henchmen here, the Vermikid, I really like making these guys ranged units. It allows you to keep them safe, do some decent damage once you get good shurikens, but unfortunately it takes some time to get the shurikens, because again, one thing I really struggled with this campaign is getting my ranged unit and the Rat Ogre good equipment, and that's because I just wasn't fighting frickin' Skaven for some reason. I don't know why I was fighting every other faction, but I probably fought 5 faction warbands, Skaven warbands, maybe 5 or 6 times, and most of those were early on before I got good equipment. So that was pretty frustrating, but I like getting their agility up. That way they have a maximum dodge chance, because especially early on, they're weak units, so the AI is going to just try to focus fire them down, and therefore if you have to get pinned down and you have to switch to melee, then you have a good dodge chance, and then getting their toughness up to be able to increase their amount of HP to keep them alive. Again, I focus on leadership first, that way they can pass their all alone, because that can easily get a unit killed in this game, and then focusing on intelligence to be able to get their stun resistance up. I focused on the ballistic skill to increase their chance to hit, and then the accuracy for their crit chances. In terms of the skills, the big thing to know about henchmen that I didn't recall is you can't do skill mastery on henchmen, so there's no point to save a bunch of points up. So get the quick reload, get the eagle eyes, get the trick shooter, and bullseye, you know, the basics here that will allow them to do pretty well at range. And then their basic skill is Warp Rage, which increases their melee damage by 15% and their dodge by 10% for 2 turns. So if you wanted to do an alternative build with these guys being in melee, they would be a good crit unit, especially if you're using them to pick up Wordstone, so in which case you want to do like agility, strength, and then accuracy focused by weapon skill. But as a melee guy, I liked getting them the sidestep. I did occasionally use their warp poison, and then I had some leftover skill points that was something for active, so I ended up giving guys headshots. If you really increase their ability to hit, then that effectively makes them do a stun check, and if you hit it and they fail the stun check, then you effectively have a guaranteed stun, which will take them out of action if they don't resist it. So that can actually be a really good ability, and it's hard to hit, but if you have them at elevation and everything, you can certainly do it. The henchmen, the Warpguard, were kind of our MVPs in terms of the henchmen on this game. I definitely like them way better than the Verminkin. So I focused on maxing out their strength so they could do pretty good damage, and then I focused on their toughness so they could actually take hits. As you can see, they have 320 health, so that's definitely pretty decent. I focused on getting their leadership up again to increase their chance to pass the fear, terror, all alone checks, and then the intelligence to try to get their stun resistance up. I focused on their weapon skills to increase their chance to hit, and then put everything else into accuracy. You could turn these guys into good two-handed weapon guys, but again, I wanted them all to be just real tanky beasts that I could use to run around, collect a bunch of items, because at 12 strength, that allowed them to get a bunch of inventory slots. And because of that, I ended up getting the Shield Specialist to increase their melee resistance and parry chance. I got them the Armor Proficient, so therefore the movement penalty to having the heavy armor on was reduced by 50%. The Quick Incision, again, to increase everybody's chance to hit. And then I gave them Flash Parry to get their parry skill even higher, so I got them to be about 99%. If you're doing a parry build, then you want to do Web of Steel, because that allows you to do 2 parry attempts every turn. If you master it, it gets to 3, but again, these guys can't master. And then I liked having the Insult and the Black Hunter, so depending on the situation, I could use those things to increase their damage or increase the chance of hitting the enemy if we were all stacked up and fighting him. Now for my other assassin, this one I had built out to be a parry. The other one I had as the dodge build. So as you can see, with the strength being higher, even with the one-handed weapon, his damage is significantly higher. He has some toughness to be able to take a hit. Again, maxed out his leadership and then the intelligence, got his weapon skill, and then focused on accuracy. Because he is a parrier, we did the Web of Steel to max out his abilities, and then I had the War Cry. The defense breach is the default, and we ended up having the Swarm to increase his chance to hit, the Shield Specialist to increase his melee resistance and parry chance, and then I gave him Swift Counter, so had he been attacked, there would have been good chances of him parrying and then getting a counter attack, and then potentially doing multiple counter attacks back, because he had an 80% chance of regaining some offensive points. So I think this would have been a really good build, and I would have been very happy to use him, but unfortunately he was injured when we were doing the final mission, so I didn't bring him out for that. But I was pretty happy with this build here. If you're going to do a sword and one-handed weapon shield build, this is what I'd recommend, and I definitely like this build much better than the dodge build. But again, I think I just had the dodge build set up incorrectly, and had I set him up with these two-handed weapons, knowing that they ended at 9 offensive points, then that would have significantly increased his damage potential. Now, these Black Skaven. This was tragic. So I got really excited when I saw how powerful their strength was and how high it goes up, because I thought, oh my god, I'm going to be able to max out their heavy armor, and then these guys are going to run all around, be incredibly tanky, and just have no difficulties. Unfortunately, I didn't look at their armors, and I didn't realize that these guys had no access to heavy armor, so I wasted tons of skill points on these guys. So you do not want to there's no reason for you to get armor proficiency, because they can't get heavy armor, so that was a big freaking waste. So these guys were just running around. They were good units. I was definitely very happy with them, but I would have been even more happy if I didn't build them out like an idiot. So, which was the one that was actually set up appropriately. This one here. So you'll have to decide, do you want to turn them as a two-handed or a like a two-handed damage dealer or a tank. Again, I like to have my guys tanky so they survive, that way they don't get injuries, and it's just easier for me to play against the AI. So their default ability is Perfect Killer, so that allows you to bypass armor absorption, which is nice, especially with the one-handed weapons. I had the Shield Specialist, which increases their melee resistance and parry chance by 10%. So, and then the quick incision, again, I like that ability on everybody. The flash parry would allow you to get that even higher. So what my plan was by maxing this guy out was to get the flash parry to be as high as possible. That way I could max out my swift counter and do tons of retaliatory attacks, because you should be parrying and doing counter attacks over and over and over again. Now the one downside about parrying in this game is there are certain weapons that cannot be parried, and therefore these guys cannot defend against it, whereas if you do a dodge, the dodge will work against every weapon, but the parries only works against like 70% of them. So that would be a downside to this build, but that's how I was going to do this. I was going to do a tank build that was going to be all focused on just running in there and getting a bunch of counterattacks, because he should get 3 parries with the Mastered Web of Steel, and I would have had extra skill points by maxing them out to maximize some of these abilities here, so that definitely would have helped me. So I liked going strength, toughness with these guys, agility up to 9, so if I was going to give them the warp poison I would have had that option. Leadership to increase the chance of passing alone, fear, and terror, then the intelligence to increase stun resistance, weapon skill for the chance to hit, and then accuracy just to do some damage when I got there. But again, if you're going to do a dodge build, these guys could also be set up with 15 strength to just do shit tons of damage with two-handed weapons, because again, they'll get 9 offensive points when they max out, but you're only going to be having 2 attacks instead of 4 attacks if you do the one-handed weapon until the very last mission, or the very last level. Now the other advantage to this is when you get the 9 points is you'll have 4 attacks with a one-handed weapon and then 1 offensive points back, so then when you parry you'll then be able to counterattack, and then if you do it again you should get 80% chance of getting that offense points. That should allow you to just keep smacking every parry that you get, especially if they get attacked. So that allows them to potentially do even more damage than the two-handed weaponers, but just keep that into consideration. The other option is it allows you to do a charge attack and then a bunch of one-handed attacks, whereas the two-handed weapons, you do the charge attack, that counts as additional offensive point to do the charge, and then because of the tiring it costs an additional offensive point. So for those reasons I just didn't really like two-handed weapons, but that's just the way I had these guys built out. But the two-handed weapons, for the most part, if you land your attacks, will definitely increase your damage substantially, and I think if I play other factions I would do some two-handed weapon builds for sure. And then finally there was the Nightrunner here. This guy I set up as a dodge build. He obviously has significant dodge chances here. And I was putting some points into strength to be able to get him to do some more damage, and also to get some increased inventory slots. His leadership and intelligence are not great, so you can never have this guy be spamming some of the leadership abilities as much as the other guys, so just keep that into consideration. I had wasted a bunch of points into alertness. I wish I would have had those points into intelligence, but I wasn't quite sure how I wanted to level this guy up, so definitely would have done that differently. And then I put his weapon skill and accuracy. Now if you're going to do a crit build, then obviously you'd want to do the accuracy and then use like the two-handed claws, or the fighting claws, because he has also passive abilities to increase that even further. So his default is fleet-footed, which if you end up, leaping, jumping down, anything like that, it increases his movement even further. I did Swarm, which increases his crit chances and his chance to hit. I did Knowledge Tactics. Again, I would not have done that in retrospect. That was a bad ability. I couldn't remember how many points I was going to get, so definitely would have rather have a different passive ability. I mastered Quick Incision, and I gave him Shield Specialist, so I turned him in kind of a tanky build with some dodge. He had some extra points, so I gave him Hold Ground to increase the dodge and parry chance of his surrounding allies. But again, he couldn't master this because he doesn't have enough leadership, and I gave him some Warp Poison. But I think you could make a solid argument that you should turn this guy into just a crit damage dealer. So you should get him Swarm, you should get him the... Oh, is it not going to show me the passive abilities now because he doesn't have one? If you click here, there's a passive ability that increases your crit chance if you use daggers or fighting claws, so you could have got that even higher. And then there's some other abilities here that let you use an attack, and then it increases your crit chance afterwards. So I think for all those things you could have really increased his crit chances substantially, and that might have been a more interesting build. But I kind of did a hybrid here, dodge parry. I don't know. It works okay, but I definitely would have done things differently on the Nightrunner. The other option is you could have turned this guy into a hero ranged unit as well, because he could do a pretty good job of that. But between having the Globadier and the Sorcerer, I just found that that was unnecessary. And I'm pretty sure I read the Nightrunner background already. So that's what I had for my Skaven guys. I hope that gives you an idea of some builds if you're having trouble beating this campaign. Definitely try to level up a Globadier, because that will make this campaign significantly easier for you. Try to keep your guys alive, and that will definitely help. These guys would be a backup way to do additional healing with some of their abilities if you want to do that. I just wanted to focus on my Globadier though, but that could have even made things even easier for me if I would have had 2 healers. But then the damage output is quite a bit lower. The nice thing about these guys is they can end up using heavy armor, so you can actually turn these guys into some pretty decent tanks here. Now, he is an arcane spellcaster, unfortunately, and the heavier the armor and everything you put on, it decreases your arcane spell chance, so it's kind of a cost-benefit analysis about whether you want to tank these guys out. Now, I'm sure I'm going to use these guys when I play with this Chaos faction, but that was our situation here. So thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you are, please give my channel a like and subscribe. Encourage me to post more content for you. Have a great day. Oh, the other thing I was going to mention, sorry, is what I found to be most effective with these guys is when you're doing these secondary factions is try to maximize one at a time, because then it'll increase the amount of money the other factions will pay you for the prices when you're sending them Wordstone, and then you have to decide like which one you want these abilities for, because by decreasing the cost by 10%, especially let's say the ballistic skill, where I'm going to have all those heroes that we're going to be putting ballistic skill on, that saved a lot of money. Same with the agility, leadership. I never really got to the alertness or accuracy, but by focusing one, getting those abilities, that will significantly reduce the cost that you're having there. And then by doing these ones first, then you can see Murder Lord Snicket is giving me +10 for his regular shipment prices here, and so that's allowing me to minimize the shipments go to him and maximizing what I'm sending to these guys to get their other abilities. Unfortunately, the cost is so high with the reputation. I mean, it's $23.75 to get it to the next level here, so that's pretty significant. The clusters give you 15, shards give you 5, and the fragments give you 1, and then that weight is the equivalent to here, and then you can just see how much they'll pay for each one here. So hopefully that helps. I just forgot to mention that in terms of, because late game, this is the most important way for you to get money. And then the other thing to know is with these abilities, you don't get, even though it says it's unlocked, you don't get the benefit of it, like the reduced cost, until you get that shipment. So you send it out, it says your shipment's here, you'll get payment. Once you get the payment, that's when the skill discount gets activated. So you don't, because if you look at this and you see, oh, it's unlocked, and then you start spending all your points upgrading your guys, you technically haven't gotten the reduced cost yet. So I just wanted to mention that to you as well here. So with that, I will now sign off. So thanks for watching, and I hope you're enjoying these videos. Have a great day.